article about white Christian nationalism, and the article basically was saying that white Christian nationalism is tied into the GOP, and they work hand in hand with Republicans. And here's my opinion on this. I mean, first of all, before rushing to judgment, you have to understand one thing. Politicians are in the same group. You know, the Democrats, the Republicans, they try to create this narrative that they're separate and that they are competitive with each other and that you have to pick one side or the other. The other side is bad. You've got to trust us. Don't trust them. We really have America's best interest at heart. But in reality, these people work with each other. They live in the same neighborhoods. And after they turn off the news television cameras and after they talk their trash, they're friends. You know, it's just like the WWE. It's just like wrestling. They're playing these characters in order to move the population. They're selling us these storylines and stuff like that, and it's all calculated. At the end of the day, they're all friends. They all work together. So that's a business model. The business model is get the American people to think that you're fighting for them, and they figure out what we want as Americans. They do polling. They go out and they ask people questions. They figure out what we're thinking, and they take those results and the answers to those questions, and they pretend that they care about those issues. Haven't you noticed that the news talks about something 1 week, 2 weeks, then the next week they don't talk about it at all? Just like critical race theory. That was all on the news. It was a big deal. Now it's like it never happened. So these politicians they're working hand in hand with the news networks because it's all about convincing the American public that they're working hard and doing what's best for us. Republicans, Democrats both do this, and they work hand in hand with their particular friendly news stations in order to convince us that they're really doing things for us. But in reality, they're all hand in hand with corporations, and they're making the corporations money, and they're trying to placate us and put the blindfold over us and make us think that we're really fighting for you by fighting against them, the Democrats, or fighting against the Republicans. Now, white Christian nationalism. This is nothing new. I wouldn't call it white Christian nationalism. I mean, at the end of the day, you've got to understand that white people are the biggest group in America. It's like 270 million white people. And the roots of this particular conflict, to make a short story short and a long story long, goes back to the Civil War. The Civil War was the southern United States succeeded from the northern United States and created their own country called the Confederacy. And for whatever reason they did it, it was because of a cultural difference between the North and the South. Now, when the countries merged back together to bring back the United States, the people who were from the Confederacy were still around. All of them had their citizenship taken away, so they were no longer Americans. And the reason they got their citizenship back, like Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis, who was the president of the Confederacy, these two people, they got their citizenship back in 1970-something, like 100 years after they died. But like 50, 70, 60, 70 years after they died, they didn't live as Americans. You know, they had their citizenship taken away. And they got it back in the 70s, you know, because the country was still healing from that even in the 70s, the 1970s. But they got their citizenship taken away, and the North was going to punish the South. They were all going to get hung, executed, and killed because they actually rebelled against the United States. You can't just form an army and say, hey, we're going against the United States, we're going to create our own country, and then when you lose, there's no consequences. So they had their citizenship taken away. And this created anger. And those Confederate soldiers and those Confederate political leaders, they were still around. They got this, they were still around. The North decided, hey, we're not going to punish them. So in the South, there was always this allegiance to the Confederacy. There was always this sentiment of they won the war, and we're mad about it, and, in reality, they wished that they could go back to the Confederacy, but they didn't have the strength to do that. So, over the years, that sentiment just never died. As people started becoming more open-minded, as America started to become more diverse, you still had that sentiment out there of the old Confederacy. I mean, the Confederate, that war was only like 120 years ago, so that's only like 3 generations. So, you got people now in the South who actually have pictures of their great-great-grandfathers, and they say, oh yeah, my great-great-grandfather was a Confederate soldier, blah blah blah, and they romanticize the whole sentiment of fighting against the North, fighting against the big industrial North, fighting against the liberal North, the democratic North, and we're going to fight for these ideals, these Southern Christian ideals, guns, God, and glory. So that sentiment has always been there. That's why all of those Confederate statues were built in the 1950s, 60s, 100 years after the Civil War. They erected these statues that we're just starting to take down. Like, there was a highway in my city, Richmond, Virginia, which is the capital of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis Highway, named after the president of the Confederacy. We have schools called Lee Davis High School, Lee Davis, schools named after Confederacy people, and we're just starting to change the names of those now. So that sentiment has always been there. You've always had a group of people that have always romanticized what the Confederacy was all about. And now in 2022, we're seeing the manifestation of that modernized. So they went from romanticizing the South, romanticizing the struggle for the Confederacy, and it's evolved into what we see now with these quote-unquote white Christian nationalists who the Republicans are so interested in keeping because they want their votes and they want their donations. And they like the fact that these voters are passionate, because as long as they're passionate about hating Democrats, they'll never hold these Republicans accountable. So their lifestyle is going to stay the same. Cost of living is going to go up. Corporate America is going to continue to rape us. But they're not going to expect the politicians to fix that, because all they want those politicians to do is to fight the cultural war. And the cultural war is the biggest sham perpetrated on, pushed onto Americans, because instead of fighting the true people who are actually making our lives difficult, who are preventing us from rising up, we're fighting the Democrats. The Republicans are fighting the Democrats. Democrats fighting Republicans. So that's just a divide and conquer technique. It's old. It's always worked. If you can get these two people fighting, we can go back here and make our deals and make all this money. So that's how I view it.